Yo, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope everyone's having a good one so far today. I'm going to be going behind the scenes into my Free Realm Sunrise original story that I wrote. Um, I'm very excited to be talking about this. I wanted to talk about it because there's a lot to talk about in the story. And if you guys were curious about certain things, like why I changed certain things or why I wrote things the way I wrote it, this is the video to watch. So, um, recommend watching this if you've read the entire thing. If you haven't read the story, I will include a link for the story down in the description, as well as the trailer for the whole story, so you know what you're getting into. Um, yeah, I'm excited to go over this. So I'm gonna go over pretty much every detail of the story. I'm not gonna read over everything. I'm gonna skip a little bit. But I'll go over the general stuff and why I chose what I chose to write. So yeah, let's dive into it. So starting out with the oh my, there we go. Um, starting out with the prologue. Um, so I did change the way the unbinding happened a little bit to kind of make more sense with the story I was telling. So I mean, you can go off of if you think this is the official lore, you can. But I'd like to think like to make more sense, this kind of makes more sense of things to go along with this story. So yeah, before we do get into it though, the reason why I wrote the story in the first place, there's a couple reasons. One being I really liked the whole Realm Keeper storyline. Even though it's based around TCG, which is I love TCG, so I really wanted to expand on this Realm Keeper story. Like I didn't want it to just be about like TCG. I wanted it to go further beyond that. So, yeah, that's one reason why I wanted to write this. I really love TCG. The other thing was someone in the Discord was like, "There's a rumor we're gonna have a writing contest," and I was like, "I'll make a doc." You know, I named the doc writing contest at first, and then I changed it to when it had been a while. I changed it to Luck of the Draw because I had come up with the title, and then I made the graphic myself. I made this, um, and yeah. So I just kind of got into writing, even though I didn't think there was going to be a writing contest at all, and now there's this creative writing position coming up. So I figured, yeah, I'd start writing this entire story in the hopes of telling some good lore. So let's get into it. So yeah, back to the prologue. So it says the Unbinding was a power of a magical artifact known as the Binding, built by the Golem Council. So I did change a couple things here. I did like this part, powerful magical artifact, but I did not like this part. Didn't really make sense to me that it got destroyed. Yeah, so I pretty much it made a wave of magical energy swept across land, wreaking much destruction. So I did change this a little bit. This part, but yeah, and here's how I wrote it. So, 13 years ago, a dwarf, and when I say 13 years ago from 2022, so from our current year, so dating back to when Free Realms first started. So 13 years ago, a dwarf discovered two elements known as gleam and gloam while mining away at ores. So this dwarf discovered the gleam and gloam elements. He was the first one to discover it while mining away at ores. He infused the elements in two separate artifacts, performed all kinds of tests on them. He and another dwarf decided to touch them. The dwarf that discovered them touched the gleam. The other touched gloam. The gleam went straight into the first dwarf and eyes glowed bright yellow. Gloam went into the second dwarf and his eyes glowed dark purple. The first dwarf gained the power of the gleam, while the second dwarf didn't gain the power at all of the gloam. So the first dwarf cast the other dwarf aside and decided to make an object that would change Sacred Grove forever. He went to Blackspore and created the Gleamstone. So it is... I went off of this for this part. So the community, or the fan base, presumed this magical artifact to be the Gloamstone. By the fan base, not verified, therefore a rumor. So I took that and decided to name it the Gleamstone, which I thought was clever. So he created the Gleamstone, not Black Spore. He created the Gleamstone. He sought to use it to expand the power of the Gleam, so he went to Sanctuary. Queen Yanni found out about this and summoned 4 heroes to stop the dwarf from what he was doing, but when they arrived, it was too late. The dwarf had used the Gleamstone on Sacred Grove and changed it forever. Warp stones were created, so the things you use to get around, he created them. So before there was no warp stones, there was nothing of Gleam. And then a crystal barrier formed in front of the Snow Hill Mountains, so that blocked Silver Hills. So for like things that got created, that's how it happened. Queen Yanni called this event the Unbinding and vowed to prevent something like this from happening again, so she had the 4 heroes start an academy to train heroes like them. So Sacred Grove would be more prepared for an event like this. For years they did this and learned everything they could about the elements, until one day everything changed. So yeah, that's kind of the prologue. It's pretty simple. Yeah, there's not much on the Unbinding, just that like this little tidbit and this, but I thought my telling of it was a little bit better because it explains certain things, and it's not kind of, you know, the binding built by the Gloam Council and that was destroyed by the ancient heroes. So yeah, I would love for this to be official lore, by the way. It would be great because it's good. I even though I wrote, you know, I'm biased, I wrote it, but I think it's really good. I don't know. But yeah, so let's get into Bryce, aka Ghost Shadow. So there's not much on Bryce other than like he's basically the leader of the group, and his ride is a dragon named Drake. But yeah, so I didn't know where to start his story, and I thought the perfect place would be Shrouded Glade. There's kind of a reason behind that, and I'll go into it. But yeah, so he started in Shrouded Glade. He was a mount trainer for the Pixies at the Academy. Once each Pixie had completed basic wizard training, they were allowed to choose mount. One Pixie asked which one is right for me. Bryce said every mount is different, but so is every Pixie, so all you have to decide is which one is like you. So the Pixie picks a saber-toothed tiger, and then Bryce asks him if it was the right one. He said, I feel a connection with this one, unlike any connection I felt with the Pixies here, so yes, this is the right choice. So later, it's a really short chapter for Bryce, but it kind of like tells the beginning of his story. He ends up seeing a mount that stares right at him named Drake. And then they end up making a connection. This whole connection thing, I made it such a huge part of the story because, you know, the game, it's a social experience, right? So this whole story is all around connections, and I think that's super important for the story. Like, they make these connections with their mounts, they make connections with people. That's kind of like the whole. It's one of the biggest things in the story. That they have to make connections with other people. So, yeah, I don't know. I thought that was a really clever part of the storytelling, was adding connections into that, since the game is a whole social experience, and the whole game, you're making friends and you're talking to people and all that. So yeah, so that's Bryce's story. And then a lot of so in the Discord, someone posted like it was a folder of TCG art, and if you look into it, it's not clear for Ghost Shadow, right? Because you can see like his little goatee. Can't see his face too much because he has a hood. But there is art of each like character with their original name. With like, this is Bryce, for example. This is kind of why I chose him to be in Shrouded Glade as a mount trainer, because he kind of looks like one, you know? Like, he literally fits the description of a mount trainer. So yeah, that's kind of how I did it, was like pretty much based off of the artworks is where I decided to put them. Not all of them, but yeah, but it's cool that like they created art for the characters. It's like the story writes itself. Like, it's wild. it's wild. So a lot of this art I did get from TCG Arts, so pretty neat. But yeah, let's get into a second chapter. So a few weeks have passed, and then the High Council took notice of Bryce training all the pixies and connecting them with their mounts. And funny enough, these TCG Arts, they all look like the same person. It's really funny. So what I did was I made them triplets, and I basically had them form this High Council of Shrouded Glade. So and they actually have names, Jonathan, Sperry, and Lazzy. And funny enough, they were triplets. And then Lazzy says to Bryce, he says, Bryce, there's something you need to hear. Come with us to council chambers. So he follows them to the chambers and introduces them to a pixie with red hair. And she says, my name is Talia. I'm the last geomancer of my kind. I need your help keeping order in Sacred Grove. And then he asks, what's a geomancer, if you don't mind me asking? She said, a geomancer is tasked with the discovery of supernatural powers or objects. By the way, I looked that description up. That is literally what it is. It's literally what it is. And she says, I have found said object. I climbed the mountains of Snow Hill and discovered something with dark power. It practically irradiated with that, so I decided to split it apart. So yeah, Talia. So this TCG art is called the SRS Geomancer. There's nothing on it for the most part. Like, I did some research, like in the Discord, I was asking people, does this pixie have a name? And they said no. So I kind of went with like I had to create my own name and own backstory. But the reason why I wanted this pixie to be part of the story, because she's holding the Gloamstone, right? So there's no other person holding the Gloamstone besides Darkchi in the story. So why would she be holding it? I had to make some story here for this, because that is kind of, like, crucial. I mean, if I did nothing with this, it would kind of be like, okay, well, there's a missing character there, you know, missing plot point for how the story starts. So yeah, I made her a character. Her name is Talia, and it's great. It's great. Yeah, I don't think I would have changed this part of the story at all. Even if I did, like, I wouldn't know how. I guess I could have, like, had the High Council be like, Bryce, you need to save the world. But, like, I don't know. I feel like this worked really well. So, continuing, she says, like, right around, says, I need you to take these 4 shards and hide them from those who would use its power. The shards resemble that of the card spheres. We can use that to our advantage by masking the shards as spear power to throw off the duelists who believe it is anything else. So, this part of the story will be explained later. Why she says this, but I wanted to mention that so TCG in the story is not a huge focus. It's like a side activity that it gets brought up. Like, TCG gets brought up, they play TCG a little bit. It's not a huge part of the story. So if you're wondering, like, why hasn't TCG been mentioned at all? Like, it will be mentioned, like, in, like, a bunch of it's mentioned in a few chapters. But yeah, and then Bryce goes to say, oh, by the way, Bryce is the narrator for the most part of the story. There is, like, 2 chapters where the narration switches up. So yeah, just an FYI in case you were wondering who narrates most of the story. But yeah, so Bryce goes to say, I played that card game before. I thought it was a good way to kill time with the pixies who wanted to break from training. So yeah, again, he had no idea actual duelists will fight over power like this. But yeah, so he's played TCG before. And it's not mentioned with the other Realm Keepers, but I'm assuming they've all played TCG. But Bryce has played it, so yeah. And also the shards. Again, the story writes itself because the shards represent, like, it does represent the spear power. And the fact that they're split up like they are means, like, that's why I kind of wrote this part. She decided to split the Gloamstone apart. So that kind of, like, I don't know, that had me thinking, like, okay, so at some point the shards did get split up, and there's art on these shards. So it's wild. It's wild stuff. So yeah, continuing, She says, "You cannot do this alone. I would suggest venturing out into Sacred Grove and finding 3 other people like yourself who are willing to do anything to protect our realm." And then she says, "Before you go, I'd like you to have these." She handed him the vestments, so like the vestments that they wear, like this blue one, and then all the others. And then she said she continued, "The order of vestment, as we're calling the shards, was what one of my teachers wore before," and it cuts off, but eventually that part of the story will be told. So, yeah. She stopped before saying anything else. "I'd like you to wear it as protector for the Order Shard. I also like to have this. My teachers called it the Blade of the Mist." So, I don't directly mention what the other weapons are called. This is like the only time I mention it in the writing. I feel like it's not super important to know what the weapons are named, besides this one, because it actually has importance. The other ones are kind of like they're kind of bland. Like they have their names, but I don't know. They don't need to have a name, because obviously she doesn't tell Bryce what the other weapons are named. But yeah, so, and she says, "Use it only if you must." And Bryce, "You also cannot use your real name for your protection. I like to go under a code name, Ghost Shadow." So the whole code name thing, it's kind of a joke. It's not really, people don't take the name seriously, except in like a couple instances. But the code names, I think, are I made them to be jokes. Like no one's gonna buy the code name. Like there's only a couple people that might in the story. So yeah, kind of funny. And she says, "It will help if you also give the others code names as well." She also handed me other weapons that go along with the other vestments. But yeah, she also says, "If you make it back here with the 3 other protectors, she'll tell him what happened. But for now, his task is more important than all that." So there is a chapter where literally she goes over her entire story, Talia's. So yeah, kind of neat. So yeah, Bryce ends up going to Lake Shore for the next part of his journey. And then of course there's art of Bryce, aka Ghost Shadow. But yeah, so continuing on, chapter 3, Jessica. Let's get into Crackshot. So yeah, Crackshot, also known as Jessica, is an archer NPC, a member of the Realm Keepers, and a card duelist. Her cousin Sam Potts taught her how to be one. She's the most patient and level-headed of all the Realm Keepers. So again, there's this big thing with all of them having mounts, so I made that a huge part of the story as well. But there's a lot to work off of here. So she's an archer, a card duelist, and a member of the Realm Keepers, and then her cousin Sam Potts taught her how to be one. So there is some story that I changed up here. Sam Potts is a card duelist trainer and archer that can be found in Sanctuary. So I did change this up. She's not a card duelist trainer in the story. I don't think it makes sense. Again, card dueling, like the card TCG is like a small part of this story. Like it's included, but it's not heavily included. And then it says she trained her cousin, an archer, and won the 4 Realm Keepers, Jessica, to become a cardie. So I changed that up as well. Instead, Sam Potts is an archer that can be found in Sanctuary. And she trained her cousin to become an archer. I think that story works a lot better. I don't know. I wanted the story to be more serious. I feel like TCG being smaller in the story makes sense for her to just be an archer trainer. So yeah. But that's kind of how I changed up the story a little bit. But yeah, so continuing on, he ends up going to Lakeshore, and then he says, "I can't believe what I was seeing." And I love Lakeshore so much. I also included that Bryce thought it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. It just looks so good, man. I wish there was I wish someone would create art, like a little logo for Lakeshore, because there isn't one. It's just, it's a little place on the map that you can go to. And when Free Realm Sunrise launches, this is probably the first place I'd go to, 100%. But yeah, And so then he sees Jessica, a girl with brown hair, and I turned the corner and saw someone magnificent. A girl with brown hair and holding a wooden bow in her hand was shooting targets stuffed with hay. Next to her was a T-Rex mount, which are extremely hard to tame. So again, for this one, I kind of was like, okay, where do I, like, again, for Crackshot, you can see her face. You can't really see her hair except in, like, this part. And it's literally, it's clear that that's Jessica without the outfit on, and then her mount King. So, yeah, and then obviously the background, I was like, okay, where do I put her? And I thought Lakeshore might be the best spot. So yeah, that's where I decided to have her. So then Bryce approached her carefully, but she turned around and nearly shot him with her bow. And Bryce yelled, "Don't shoot, I come in peace." I do include like a lot of like humor elements into the story, so like stuff to laugh about, and then obviously more serious moments. So yeah, and then she said, "You nearly gave me a heart attack, man. You just don't sneak up on girls like that." And he started blushing, and then he looked over at the T-Rex, and it snarled at him, and he asked, "Who's your friend over there?" And she said, "His name's King, been with me since I was a little girl." And Bryce was shocked. He had no idea mounts could bond anyone at any age. So yeah, this Mount King, the T-Rex mount, has been with Jessica since she was a little girl, so mounts can definitely bond with other people like at a young age. So that's, again, that whole connection thing, I kind of make sense. But yeah, so and then right here he asks her name, and she says Jessica Potts, but you can call me Jessica. And he exclaimed, "Are you related to Sam Potts? I've seen her on a card display during card games up at Shroud Glade, again, including TCG." But yeah, and she said, "She's my cousin, taught me how to shoot this bow, as a matter of fact, and because of her influence in Sanctuary, they had a card made specifically for her, and now she guards Sanctuary with her life." So she's kind of a guard at Sanctuary, just kind of protects it as an archer, which is how I like, how I love, I can't speak, how I'd like to tell it, you know? I feel like it makes more sense for the story. So yeah, and then it goes to here, and Bryce asks, "So how do you feel about changing things up to be, you know, from shooting hate targets to protecting things that matter?" He shows her the nature shard and asks, "This shard represents something powerful, which means I need to find people like you to protect it. Can you do that?" She said, "I don't know if I can do it, but I'll try to do what I can." Because that's what Sam would do. So Jessica really takes after Sam Potts in that way, which I like a lot. And he said, "All right, before we go anywhere, you need to hide the shard so no one can find it. If it gets in the wrong hands, it could be the end of Sacred Grove." She took it out of his hand and threw it into the Lakeshore Lake. And it's like, he's stunned, and he says, "Well, why'd you throw it in the lake?" She said, "Well, you told me to hide it, so I did. Trust me, no one will find that shard." And I'll change this to ask. I did a lot of like proofreading, but apparently not enough. He told me to hide it, so I did. Trust me, no one will find that shard anytime soon. Just he throws it in the lake for giggles. It's kind of just a funny little scenario, but yeah. He decided to take a word for it. He thought if no one dare go into a mine shaft, then no one would be stupid enough to swim to a bottom of the lake. And then she joins him on his journey. And then he asks, "Hey, how would you like to decide where we go next?" She said, "How about Sanctuary? If I ever need help with something, Sam always knows the answer." So they go to Sanctuary, and that's where chapter 4 starts with Crackshot's story. So yeah, kind of interesting that they well, what I was gonna say was the chapters, right? So they're all like, it starts with Bryce, Ghost Shadow, Jessica, Crackshot. That's kind of how the hero chapters start in a way. Like it tells their, you know, their personal story, and then it also tells their hero story, how they become who they are. So yeah, that's kind of how I structured these first few chapters, and I think it works really well. And then obviously, I named them differently later on in the story, but yeah. So they go to Sanctuary, but before they do, they end up camping. And then Bryce didn't even tell her her his name, so he goes, "My name is Bryce, but I'm supposed to be going by the code name Ghost Shadow." She turned her head sideways and looked at him funny, and then said, "Ghost Shadow sounds like a cool code name, but I like Bryce way better." So, then she smiled at me, and he smiled back. So there's kind of like a huge connection between Bryce and Jessica, which is kind of why I have their pictures on the graphic I made. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like they're a huge focal point in the story. It's kind of why I did that. They have this huge connection. So, yeah. But again, like, she turns her head sideways and looks at him funny. So, like, there's kind of like, again, humor in the fact that they don't take the code name seriously. And Bryce kind of barely uses it, but yeah, I thought it was kind of funny. I don't know. Like, for this first part of the story, there's a lot of humor, which I liked writing about. So yeah, and then we go a bit down here, and then suddenly there was movement in the trees. 3 hooligans appeared, and one said, "Give us everything you got. If we don't got everything you got, use the seaside crab. Get us." And Bryce stood there for a second, thought about their proposal, and said, "You know what, guys? It's the middle of the night. Me and the lady here were just having a campfire story time. I'd appreciate it if you didn't interrupt." And Jessica giggled quietly and smiled at the hooligans. And Bryce asked, "So, gents, what'll it be, the high road or the crossroads?" A little bit of humor there. And he said, "We don't take kindly to backtalk. You asked for this." And then Bryce smirked and charged the hooligans. His sword suddenly lifted into the air, conjured the wind in the night sky, and took out 2 of the hooligans. The sword returned to his hand. Just by seeing that, I assumed the sword was magic. Same with the vestments the way around. So there is, it's mentioned later, but there's apparently magic in the sword and the vestments, which is, it's not really, it's explained. I think it's explained in later chapters. I hope I wrote it like that, but yeah, it's kind of hinted at right here that there's magic with the sword and the vestments. Because yeah, Bryce literally knows nothing about combat, so it's literally like he's like, whoa. He had some like confidence in him. Then he says, "Because I was shocked, the 3rd hooligan nearly struck him down with his giant hammer, but then I heard 2 arrows fly right past my hood. 1 into the hooligan, all 3 of them were down." And then Bryce exclaims, "Way to go, crack shot." And she was confused by why he called her that, but then he pointed to the tree. One of the arrows she shot went straight through it. She was speechless. So, kind of how she gets her name, because he says it like that, and then there's some humor here, and he's like, "I don't know how I'll repay you," and she says, "Okay, you sleep on the wood log, I'll sleep in the tent." So yeah, night passes, and then they make it sanctuary. And then Jessica tries to introduce Bryce, and then he says, "My name is Ghost Shadow. Nice to meet ya." And Jessica glares at him, and like glares at him, but knew why he chose the code name. And Sam says, "As defender of Sanctuary, you should probably bow to me, Ghost Shadow, or face the consequences." She clearly didn't buy the code name, but also couldn't tell if she was joking about them bowing. So he bowed, and she laughed and said, "I was only joking. Get up, ninja. Now what brings you in my cousin's sanctuary?" And Bryce gives her the spiel about everything. And then they end up leaving, going to Maryvale, because she says, "However, I do know of someone who might fit the job description of the Maryvale," Sam says, and then they start heading there, and then Sam pulls him aside and whispers, "Don't think I don't know what game you're playing, Bryce. Just told me your real name." He gulped. She continued, "Whatever journey you're on, my cousin better not get hurt because of it, or you'll get an arrow right between the eyes. You understand?" And then they go off, and then he says to Jess, he says, "I'm taking your cousin's card out of my card deck and banning said card from further games with the Pixies." A little bit of humor there, but also including the whole card game thing. So, yeah. And then she says, "Oh, don't let my cousin intimidate you, Bryce. Just what family does. We look out after each other." And then he thinks, or he says, I can't really talk right now, but because of that talk he had with Sam, it felt right to give Jessica the vestment and the weapon, so he handed her the gear, and then he said, put this on and use this instead of your old bow. What you have now should come in handy in case hooligans decide to jump our campfire story time. And then he said, before we said, I asked her, so now that we're done here, did you come up with your code name yet? She looked down at her bow, smiled, and said, yeah, definitely. Call me Crackshot. He smiled and said, you got it, Jess. Unless you don't want me to call you by that. Sam then I thought she cuts him off and said, that's fine by me, Brycey Bear. He cringes hearing that and then made a face at her and said, okay, you know I like Bryce better than that nickname. And they both laughed and set off for Maryvale. So yeah, and that's when we get into Nathan's chapter. So let's dive right on in. All right, so getting into chapter 5, Nathan. So to kind of kick it off, just want to go into his background a little bit. So Mage Tech, also known as Nathan, is an NPC wizard, yet he is also described as a tinkerer, a strategist, and also enjoys complicated things with a lot of moving parts. Despite his job as a wizard, he has built his own mechanical gauntlets and goggles. Mage Tech's deck is machine, and his signature weapon is the Wand of the Elements. His ride is a clockwork hoverboard Dove Sparky. So there's a lot of bits and pieces you can take here for his character. Again, I mentioned it before, but with like Crackshot's weapon, Mage Tech, and Wildclaw, I don't think I outright named their weapon besides Bryce's. So yeah. But yeah, so I made everything here canon for the most part. Him being a wizard, him making his own gauntlets and goggles, which I will go over in the story. So one thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to point out, so there is a part up here. So this being a visual novel, I wanted to, because for a lot of like these beginning chapters, I'm describing where they're going, where like everyone's going, and I wanted to include like images of like how long it took to get there. So like from Lakeshore to Sanctuary, I included an actual map that I got from a strategy guide for Free Realms. So yeah, and it's really detailed. It's super neat. I had a picture for Try to Glade Lakeshore, but it didn't really need one, so I took it out. Because the distance is like, it's super short. Like Lakeshore is here, and then up above it's Try to Glade, so it's not that far. But yeah, for that one I did that, and then I also did the one for Maryvale just because. So let's get into Nathan's chapter. So they make their way to Maryvale, and then down here, just as we were approaching Maryvale, 5 goblins showed up out of nowhere, and one of them said, "You aren't getting past this without paying the toll, so pay up or scram." And Bryce asks, "How much is the toll?" And he said, 1 million coins. Bryce nearly screamed when the Robgoblin said that amount. I barely have 5 coins, so he told him, "I've got pocket change, so I don't think that toll is really fair." He yelled, "Then you aren't getting through." And then Jess steps up and says that she's got this, and then the Robgoblin says, "What are you gonna do, little girl? Attack me with your good looks?" She smirked, and then she pointed her bow up in the air to release a loud sonic-like noise that only hurt the Robgoblin's ears. So a lot of like those moments, like when Bryce fights off the hooligans, when she does that, it's activating the weapon's ability. So in a certain situation, this ability for their weapon gets activated whenever there's like a situation. So yeah, it's kind of wild. But the reason why I did that sonic loud noise thing that she does with her bow is because of this image going off of this one. Like it's not clear what this does, but like the little effects off of it means like, okay, so she's probably breaking the sound barrier, I'm guessing. So that's kind of how I did that. It's kind of how I introduced that ability for her. So yeah, in certain situations, their abilities get activated for their weapons. And right about here, Bryce says, "My best guess is that these weapons are full of magic, but who knows? It's probably just another mystery of the Grove." So again, like I said before, there's magic within like the vestments and the weapons. I don't think I specified what magic there is in the vestments. Best thing I could tell you just from like what's unwritten is that the vestments help with like agility, or like it helps your stats, you know, in like an MMO type of sense, you know. I think it just boosts their stats if we're just talking technical terms, but yeah. So they get to Maryvale, and then Jess says to Bryce, you have to see this. And he hurried on over and saw a guy working on something. Couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a mount. Just got me a closer look. It was a mount, but it was a mount that Bryce had never seen before, because he was a mount trainer. And it looked almost like junk, but it floated. And he said he needed answers about the contraption. He ran up to the center of Maryvale and said, "You've got to tell me what kind of mount that is." Little did Bryce know, this is the guy that Sam Potts mentioned back at Sanctuary. He said, "Dude, where are your manners? I don't even know your name. You're over here barking orders. Name first, then we'll talk." And then he uses the code name thing again. It kind of backfires. So he says, "Oh, my name's Ghost Shadow." He tried selling again, but he wasn't buying it. And he asked, "Your real name, please?" Just started giggling behind him. Of course, this guy would have bought the name Crackshot, but he gave up. He said, my real name is Bryce. Sorry about that. We're trying to be undercover." Nathan says, "Oh, gotcha. No worries, man. Your name?" Jess said, "My name is Jessica. Codename Crackshot." Glenn said, "Now that codename I like. Bryce, you need a better one." And then he adds here, my name was passed down from Talia's teacher, who was probably old as dust. So, yeah. And then Bryce asked, "So now that you know our real names, do you mind telling us yours?" He said, "No, I don't mind. It's Nathan. Nathan for short." And yeah, so this is, again, the whole TCG art, the fact that, like, it's so... again, the story writes itself. Like, they included the art of all these TCG players, like all the Realm Keepers and all that. So it's cool. I like it. It really helped with the... That's why I decided to make this a visual story, because of all these art pieces. It just made sense to do it. So, yeah. So yeah, Bryce, go ahead. Oh, before I continue, so the location where Mage Tech is at, I almost thought to do Seaside for where he was at, but there is a little note here for like all of the Realm Keepers. Yeah, it's literally for all of them. They're all at these 3 different locations: Sunstone Valley, Seaside, and Black Spore Swamp. I didn't avoid going to Black Spore, but Seaside and Sunstone Valley I didn't want to go to. For, I guess, storytelling reasons, because it would have been, I don't know, I feel like it would have been better to just not go to some of the locations that were originally they were supposed to be at. So, yeah. I figure, and I guess for the quest line, they were at these locations, so this is kind of a prequel to that, in a way. But, anywho, continuing, Bryce says, "I've never seen a mount like that before. I happen to be a mount trainer at Strataglade. Care to explain?" He nodded and said, "I like to tinker with anything lying about, like my goggles and gloves. I built these myself. One day, I decided to experiment, mostly because I've been seeing everyone in Sacred Grove riding around a mount. So I went up to one of the junk piles nearby with a magnet I acquired from our Robgoblin neighbors, and the metal connected with it." Then he continues, "I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was making, but I would like to think it turned out pretty good, considering it floats." He asks, "Well, I get it comes from a junk pile, but do you even know what that junk is made out of? What if the mount goes kablooey?" He says, "If it went kablooey, it would have kablooed everywhere by now." A little bit of humor there. He says, "But to answer your question, junk is made of parts from a place called Glimmer Deep." So including that area in there, and I'll talk more about that like way later in the story, because we gotta go down a bit before we get to that point. So it says, "Learned that from an archer by the name of Sam Potts up at Sanctuary. It's the whole reason I want to try this experiment out." Yeah. And he says, "Well, you made a new mount. I think it's only fair you give it a name others will know the mount by, and your own personal name. So what will it be?" He started to think about it, then a light bulb appeared above his head. Literally, I'm almost sure he did that for laughs again. More humor. He said, "I'll call it the Clockwork Hoverboard, and a fitting name for my board will be Sparky." So I want to kind of like explain this whole part. So in that moment, he was creating the first hoverboard mount. Now, I don't say it directly, but I just want to make that clear. He's the one who created the hoverboard mount. So it's not included in the lore. It's not. I made that. I felt like since he tinkered with his own gauntlets and goggles, I feel like it would make sense if he made his own hoverboard, his own mount. I don't know. I thought it made a lot of sense to tell his story to begin with. So, yeah. And then Bryce goes ahead and says, "Hey, how would you like to join us on our journey?" He said, "You know what? That sounds like something I need. A journey to test out Sparky. You two seem like quite the pair. I'm in." Things were coming together, so then he presented him with the machine artifact and said, "Big part of this journey we're on is finding people like us to protect power like this. And I could tell from Sparky that you'd do about anything to see things through." And then he asked, "What do you need me to do with this?" He said, "It's best to keep it hidden. Here seems like the best place." He dropped it below the rainbow like glow, that that thing coming out of Maryvale in the center. He dropped it below there. And then he said, "All right, where do we start, Ghost Shadow?" And then he said, "We'll head to Sanctuary, get our bearings, and go from there." And so they left for Maryvale. They left from Maryvale to Sanctuary. So, Bryce and him start talking, but they start talking. And he says, "So besides tinkering, is there anything else you have a talent in?" He laughed and said, "Actually, yes, I am a wizard. No line here." And he said, "Did you train at the academy? Because I think I would have recognized Sparky before." He shook his head and then started to look at the rainbow-like glow above Maryvale, then said, "I trained in Maryvale since I was 12. Now I think I'm considered advanced, but definitely not a master." This kind of confirms, like, I don't confirm age outright in the group, but I don't really confirm age, but kind of there you can kind of like guess how old he is and how old the rest of the group might be. But yeah, I don't think like it's not really a huge, age isn't a huge thing in the story. But I guess I do like diverge between time periods, so you can kind of tell like how long things have been going on, but not like age. Anywho, he says, "Now I think I'm considered advanced, but definitely not a master." He goes on this. Bryce asks, "I thought the academy is the only place you could train to become a wizard. Guess I was wrong, but why'd you train here of all places to become a wizard?" He laughs and says, "Sometimes you gotta work where the magic happens, and that is Maryvale, my friend. There's no place like this, and every day I feel its energy." That's how I wrote it. I wanted Nathan to be like the, I guess the, the good vibes kind of guy in the group, like the spiritual guy, if you will. I don't know. I thought that was kind of his character. Like, he has this good vibe about him. So yeah, continuing, they get to Sanctuary, and Jess was talking with Sam, and it seemed like a serious conversation. And then Sam asked, "Just got a report due east. Someone is looking to do a raid on Tanglewood Fort in Briarwood alone. Anyone attempting to do that is asking for it. I was asking Jess if you are all up for helping the idiot out." By the sounds of it, seemed like Rock's mission. What better way to prove the Sacred Grove that we're its protectors? And Bryce says, "You can count on us. We won't let you down." So they end up going to Briarwood, and again, I include like an image for like how it took a bit to get there. I mean, it's right next to Lakeshore. Like, it's crazy. It seems like a huge map, but realistically, all like the locations in the story are pretty close together. So yeah. So getting into it, they end up going to Briarwood's Hedge Mage, and they said it was massive. And then they were all staring on until Bryce said to Nath, "Hey, you're going to need these." He handed him the vestment and weapon, then said, "We're going to enter the deadliest place in Sacred Grove. You're going to be able to defend yourself. Besides, a wizard like you needs to tell us how this place feels." He looked scared and said, "Well, I can tell you one thing. You won't find an ally in there or anything, really. This place feels like it's corrupting Sacred Grove. You can practically feel the bad vibes." So again, he's a good vibes kind of dude. He can feel the energy. But yeah, so he got the vestment and weapon just right then and there. And I don't think, did I? Oh no, I didn't. Okay. We're not to that point yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, so going a little bit farther, they're in the Hedge Mage, so like you can actually tell if you go back up to the image, you can tell where they're at. They're right here, right next to Warp Zone. And throughout the entire thing, I don't actually let them use the warp stone. I pretty much spend the whole story like they're mainly walking. They don't need to use the warp stones. And I even make that point in the story where it's mentioned why warp stones aren't really used, I guess, for one character. But yeah, anywho. So they get to the Hedge Mage, and they were attacked by the Thorn Vines and creatures of the maze. They fought them off with what they could while trying to find a way out of there, but there were too many of them. Jess and Bryce ran to a dead end and were trapped by multiple thorn creatures, but then suddenly Bryce heard a boom, or kablooey rather, but he looked up and saw Nath. He was wielding the power of the wand I gave him, gathering lightning from the sky. He charged at everything in the maze and zapped them with his new wand, one by one, eventually clearing a way for us to leave the maze. We climbed up a hill and overlooked the maze and attempted to catch our breath. Bryce said, Nath, please, for all that is Gleam, do that more often. Jess agreed and said, yeah, whatever you did saved us. And then he says, oh, it was nothing. That wand you gave me really felt inspiring. Gave me all sorts of good vibes, blocking the bad energies of this rotten place. Bryce smiled and asked him, so, how about a code name now that you're one of us? Or a fake name, as you'd call it. He laughed and said, you know, I was thinking of one ever since you told me yours. How does Mage Tech sound? And Bryce dead-eyed him and exclaimed, that's the coolest, fakest name I've ever heard in my academy life. And I've met a pixie named Winx. They both bursted out laughing and gave each other a high five. Things are starting to look up for them, and now they had a rescue mission to do. So yeah, a lot of humor in that last part. But yeah, I think like Mage Tech was the perfect name for Nathan, because you know he's a mage, he builds his own stuff. It's kind of perfect anyway. So that's kind of why like I had him build his own hoverboard too, just because like he makes things, so it only made sense for him to build his own mount. So now that we're done with that, we're gonna get into Cade's chapter, which is Cade's chapters are interesting, so I'll get into him. Let me bring up his tab. And by the way, I've used Free Realms Wikia for like all of this for the most part. I don't think I use any other source other than the Free Realms Wikia. It's literally the best thing. So yeah, let's get into this. So Wildclaw, also known as Cade, is an NPC brawler. He is said to become a werewolf at a young age. Madame Zelda showed him how to harness his werewolf powers to help balance his human and feral aspects. Signature weapons were Hammer the Wolf, and his ride is ironically a wolf named Fane. So yeah, I do include Madame Zelda in this. Now she does have a huge presence in the story. We can just bring her up right now because she's gonna play a part throughout the entire story. So Madame Zelda is strange, mysterious things are happening everywhere in the swamp, and I see them all, or usually. Madame Zelda is a human NPC located in Blackspore Swamp, where she hosts special quests during Super Spectacular. She also assisted in the TCG Series 4 Baron Von Darkcheat by gathering all the Realm Keepers together and training them to defeat the series' namesake, Baron Von Darkcheat. So, there's a lot I change here with her story. So it says she gathered all the Realm Keepers together and trained them to defeat Baron Von Darkcheat. Now, this is not how I wrote it. How I wrote it was, well, you'll see, but I wrote it to basically be she assists them, but doesn't actually train them, because obviously Talia is the one who started this whole thing, and that's pretty much it. You know, it's I would like to think Madame Zelda is like she's someone who assists, and she's also like a sort of parental guardian to Cade. So that's kind of how I wrote it. But she does play a good role in the story, I would like to think. I think there's like 3 scenarios in where she's written. 3 or 4, give or take. But that's how I wrote it. So, for Cade, so we made our way down to the trail to the fort, and all we could see for miles was nothing but thorn vines and trees. Jess looked around and said, gotta say, I sure am missing Lakeshore right about now. Bryce agreed and said, yeah, nothing beats Lakeshore, but there's definitely someone who lives here and has gotten used to the rotten trees. Nate said, first off, Maryvale beats Lakeshore easily. And also that's kind of a nod to like, there's a bunch of people in the Discord who like, they like to say, oh, this place is better than that place. So I thought that was kind of funny. Easily. Second off, who in their right mind would want to live in a place like this? Bryce said, Probably someone not like you or me. I mean, look around. Those vine creatures live here, which means someone who's different than most of the people in Sacred Grove lives here. Jess looked at him confused and asked, like an outcast? Someone who doesn't belong or was shunned by others? Bryce said, something like that, yeah. I imagine if you didn't fit in elsewhere, you might have come here for a change, and you probably would have been accepted by the scary trees. And they said, people shouldn't be rejected, be forced to look for acceptance here. It's just wrong. I always give people the benefit of the doubt without a second thought. So this was kind of a serious moment, I would like to think, because a lot of people, like, you know, a lot of people, they're depressed or, you know, they feel different to other people. Like, I'm sure someone who goes to Snow Hill is just happy all the time. And then, you know, there's people who are, you know, they want to be in a darker place in Sacred Grove. They'd want to go to, like, Black Spore or Briarwood. So, yeah, I thought that was, like, kind of important to talk about. It's like, you know, Nath says, who would want to live here? And Bryce says, people who don't belong, you know? I thought that was a super, like, important thing to talk about. I don't know. But that's just me. I thought that was really good to talk about. You know, for people who don't belong. I think it, you know, a lot of people might appreciate me writing that in. So, anywho, they finally arrived at Tanglewood Fort. The whole thing was massive. There was guards everywhere. There we go. And he says to Nath, I told you someone lived here. He rolled his eyes and just pointed out someone below. It was a guy hiding behind a rock, observing the fort. Could be the guy dumb enough to raid the fort by himself. So they approached him. Bryce said quietly, hey, what do you think you're doing, man? The guy turned around and looked really upset, but said, I need to go in there. I don't care if I die. I have to save him. And then Jess asked, who do you need to save? He said, Fang, he's my wolf. They took him from me, but I know he's in that fort. I need to get him back. Bryce says, you can't go in there alone, man. You'll get seriously hurt or worse. Then he yells, I don't want anyone else getting hurt. I'm rescuing Fang. Then out of nowhere, he started transforming. He grew hair everywhere, grew fangs, grew a tail. So when Bryce noticed he looked exactly like a wolf, he started running into the fort like a madman. So he asked Jess, me and Nath will take care of the archers on the top of the wall. Can you run in and help the idiot so he doesn't get hurt? I'm going to read I'm doing a lot of rewriting while doing this, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. He said, Nathan and I will take care of the archers on the top of the wall. Can you run in and help the idiot so he doesn't get hurt? She sighed and said, yeah, I got him. So yeah, this is Cade. So this is how I introduced Cade into the story. He's the idiot trying to get into the fort. He's doing it by himself. So yeah, Jess ran after our wolf life friend who was wolf life. I don't know why I wrote it like that. New boy. Wolf boyfriend. He was completely tearing up the wood on the fort, nearly clawed through every troll and spider to get his wolf back. She shot 2 spiders down and used that piercing noise on the Chugawug shoulders. Chugawug soldiers? I can speak. They took care of the archers and caught up with her. Bryce asked, this place is no joke. Why are Chugawugs guarding the fort in this rotten place? And so I have Bryce ask this question because obviously they probably haven't been to Briarwood, so they don't know why there's Chugawugs there. And I do bring this up in another point. Jess shrugged, but Nath said, you said it yourself, man. This is a place for those who don't belong. And those Chugawugs thought they belonged here instead of drinking sarsaparilla at Wagachug. So yeah, so the Chugawugs, I know there's like lore where it's not like they don't know this, obviously, but the Chugawug soldiers are obviously there for Darkthorn. And they just assumed that the Chugawugs thought they didn't belong, but that's obviously not the case here. But they just think that they don't know any better. So, yeah. And then they said, and then it goes on to say, we caught up to our idiot wolf friend and saw that he was facing up against a Chugawug commander of sorts. Jess and Nath were about to charge in, but Bryce said, wait, this is his fight. What you two should do is free his wolf. I'll help this guy if he gets in trouble. They nodded, but didn't know what they were looking for. Then Jess exclaimed, I found him! Nath ran over to see a wolf mount, and then asked, "That's a little on the nose, don't you think? Maybe a little too much irony in our current situation." So I kind of include that irony right here. His ride is ironically a wolf named Fang. I thought that would be funny to include into the story. If they thought it was a little on the nose. She exclaimed, "But look at him! He's so cute!" It's like, that's how I wrote it. It's just it would have been funny to see like a different side of Jess, and I think it's super great. So Nate shrugged and said, "Sure, whatever you say, but let's get him out of this fort before more Chugawugs show up. You can pet him then." She smiled and they ran outside the fort. Meanwhile, Bryce was observing the sky fight in a Chugawug. "I've seen a lot this past week, but this one takes the cake. Seeing half a human, half wolf person is mind-blowing." Chugawug said, "I'm Commander Clugging-Crush, and you need to leave my fort now before you face the consequences." And then Wolf Boy snarled, there we go. Wolf Boy snarled and said, "Not on my life." I should probably yell that. And dug his teeth and claws into the Chugawug's legs, arms, and eventually got the better of him, and the commander passed out. There is art for Commander Clugging-Crush, but I didn't want to include it because, I mean, you know what a Chugawug looks like, but that's like the only like image I didn't include. So this part's a little bit like texty, but yeah. And then Bryce ran up to Wolf Boy and asked, "Hey, do you understand me? Can you calm down now?" He yelled, "Where is Fang?" Bryce said, "Don't worry, my friends got him out of the fort. They're waiting outside, but I need you to calm down and come with me." He growled at Bryce and followed. Hard to believe I got growled at by Wolf Boy today, but it happened. They left Tanglewood Fort safely. Jess was petting Fang when we arrived. Wolf Boy growled at her and yelled, "Back off!" and hugged Fang. Bryce whispered to Jess, "A little on the nose, don't you?" She cut Bryce off and said, "Let Wolf Boy have his moment." And then wait, is there a space here? Of course. Okay, fix. And then suddenly he returned back to his human form, but he was naked. I didn't know if he was like, I didn't write it, but he was probably naked when he was behind the rock. And Bryce felt bad, so he gave him the last vestment he had left. Not that I was going to give him the shard, but I can't let Wolf Boy rock around naked. So he said, "Thanks, you didn't have to do that." Bryce looked at him confused and said, "Do you always walk around with no clothes on?" He said, "No, but I'm just grateful that I have Fame back. He means more to me than clothing." That's a really wholesome line I wrote in there, dude. It's super wholesome. And then Bryce said, "Hey, we never got your name." And then he says, "Oh, right, sorry. My name is Cade." And so this art, it's him and Blackspore. It's not really... It's kind of hard to tell if it's Blackspore. It probably is, but it could be Briarwood, so it didn't really matter if I, had him in a different location or not. But yeah, so I actually, like, kind of, you could obviously... This is how I figured out how the artworks were some of the Realm Keepers, like their actual person, because of this image, because... This is literally Cade with the red suit on in his human form. Like, that's so good. It's so great that, like, they made this. They didn't have to make this art. They didn't. They just did. And I don't even think, like, the TCG cards are their actual names. I don't know. I'm pretty sure they're not. Because I think I looked into it, and I could probably, like, pull it up. I'd have to go look. But I have, like, a bunch of images downloaded of that. So yeah, it's kind of crazy that like they made this art even though they didn't have to. But yeah, so that's his Mount Fang, and then that's Cade. So yeah. Bryce says, "Nice to meet you, Cade. My name is Bryce. This is Jess, and that is Nath. We actually came all this way to stop you from going into that fort, but you definitely had your reasons." Then he says, "Yeah, it was pretty stupid of me to do that, but I had no choice. Fang is all I've ever had." Bryce looked at Fang. Seems he's also got a strong connection with his mount. Again, that whole connection thing. I'm making that so important in the story. Like, that connection matters. But yeah. So Bryce asked, "So, care to explain what's going on with Wolf Boy?" Cade chuckles and said, "Yeah, I'm what Madame Zelda refers to me as," and again, including Madame Zelda into the story. A werewolf, which is half human, half wolf person. And then Bryce asked, gotcha, but who is Madame Zelda? He said, she's the one who cared for me when no one else did. I nearly came here before she saved me, even gave me Fang. So, basically, Cade, to kind of elaborate on that, he nearly came to Briarwood before going to Blackspore to be cared for by Madame Zelda. So he was in the outcast situation where he thought he had nowhere to belong or nowhere to go. So, if I needed to point out that point that I made in a couple pages up was important, there you have it. It's pretty important. But yeah, so Madame Zelda basically gave him Fang when he was young. She showed him how to harness his werewolf ability so they wouldn't get out of control. And then Bryce asked, so what happened at the fort then? He said, I can't get emotional. That is one thing above all else that makes me become like Fang here. Madame Zelda says I'm not allowed to feel emotions in general because of this curse, as I used to call it, but it's not that anymore. It's who I am. So, to kind of like elaborate on that part, Cade cannot feel emotions. So he's not allowed to be happy, not allowed to be sad. He just can't be like, he can't feel. He's just numb to everything. He has to be numb to everything, or else he will turn into a werewolf. So this is how he's learned to control it. It's a super depressing like line that he's not allowed to feel, but I feel like it's super important. It's probably how werewolves turn anyway. So yeah. And then Jess nearly teared up and said, how can you not feel? That's just not right. You have to feel emotions. It's part of being a person. Cade says, I suppose being half-wolf takes over that emotional side and vice versa. It's who I am, and unfortunately, I can't change that. Jess nodded and backed off, and then Bryce asked, so now that you have Fame back, where are you going? What are you going to do now? He said, I've got to head back to Blackspore, my home. It's where Madame Zelda is, actually. And then Bryce wanted to learn from this Madame Zelda and hopefully get Cade to join the team. And Bryce asks, hey, do you mind if we tag along? Jess and Nate looked at him confused, but Bryce smiled at them, hoping they knew he had a plan. He said, sure, I wouldn't mind the company, and Fang sure likes Jess. Jess smiled and gave Fang head pats. I included head pats into the lore. It was a silly line, but that's probably what you do to most animals that you have pets for. So, and then Bryce says, awesome, and since you got to have an outfit like ours, you'll probably need this weapon to go with it. Got to match the suit. Cade looked confused and said, okay, why would I need a hammer? I'm half wolf. And Bryce said, well, who knows? Maybe that will come in handy. Might be able to channel your emotions into it. He looked at it and said, well, I hope so. It'd be good to let those out without consequences. So yeah, that's kind of how the story goes. They hope to recruit Cade to their cause, and then they meet Madame Zelda. So this goes into Chapter 8, Wildclaw. They arrived at Blackspore, but the whole place was surrounded by mountains. So if you don't know, Blackspore is kind of hidden, I would like to think. And there are, I believe there are mountains to the side of it, to the entrance. At least that's how it was to me when I was a kid, when I played the game. It was super hard to find. Might be different now, but yeah, so Bryce asks Cade, how do we get in? And he says, through this gap in the mountains here, follow me. We followed him in, though they could barely see a thing. Scrolled down a little bit. And okay, so yeah, this is kind of how it looks on the map. So you can barely see the entrance on the map. It's really hard to see, but it's right here where I'm hovering. It's that little dirt patch. That's the entrance. At least I think it is. So it's super closed off. That's why I said mountains. But yeah. And then Bryce asked Jess and Nathan, doesn't this place just give you the creeps? Jess said, it's a little better than Briarwood, not scary looking. And Nate said, I gotta say, it's really chilly here, and it gives me the chill seeing all the tombs. Cade overheard the conversation and said, hey, don't scare the ghosts if you see them. They kind of live here. And Bryce looked at him and asked, you do know ghosts aren't real, right, Cade? He chuckled and asked, well, if ghosts aren't real, then how come I can turn into a wolf? Bryce nodded and asked, fair point, but still, I'll believe it when I see it. Are the ghosts friendly? He said, some of the locals are, yeah, but if you go into the actual graveyard where I learned to harness my wolf side, those ones aren't so friendly. And then that made Bryce ask him, what made you want to harness your wolf side to the graveyard? He chuckled and said, Madame Zelda trained me there when it's where I could feel every emotion, fear, anger, depression, etc. It's how I learned to suppress any emotion so I could keep my wolf side in check. Bryce asked, hey, speaking of that, do you like turning to a werewolf, or do you only turn to one when you need to? He sighed and said, no, I don't like it, but it's part of who I am, so I just gotta live with it. I only turn if absolutely necessary, which with Fang was necessary, but I didn't do it on purpose. Bryce nodded and said, right, you let your emotions get the better of you. Well, hopefully that hammer will come in handy one day and you won't have to go wolf on any of us. He sighed but nodded, and then Bryce kind of narrated it seemed like he was in constant battle more than any of us on a day-to-day basis. Then Cade goes on to say, we're close to Madame Zelda's house, so stay on your toes. So, again, Madame Zelda, she's going to play a big role. Not a big role, but like a pretty substantial role in this part of the story. So, as we're close to Madame Zelda's house, so stay on your toes. I guess our feet weren't technically on the ground, but he understood the expression. So they're on their mounts right now. I didn't like write it into that, but they were on their mounts because it's quite a ways away from Briarwood. So yeah, they were on their mounts. It's not, I don't write it in, but I think it is kind of like obvious when I say their feet weren't technically on the ground. But yeah, and then Bryce narrates, I had no idea what to expect from Madame Zelda, but maybe she could tell us about our weapons or the shards, but maybe she didn't know anything and was just Cade's caretaker. They arrived at what looked like a small hut and assumed this was his home, or Madame Zelda's home, rather. Cade knocked on the door and opened. Just by looking at her, she looked like a fortune teller of sorts. And then Cade says, I got Fame back safe. She said, did your emotions get the better of you? And don't lie. Hell no. He said, yeah, they did, but I had some help. He referred to the three of them, and she walked over to give her thanks. She said, thank you for helping him. Hopefully he wasn't too feral. A little bit of humor there. Bryce chuckles and said, nah, I just seem to really love his wolf. I think it shows that some emotion was needed to get Fame back. She shook her head and said, as a werewolf, he needs to learn to be level-headed. Sure, love could possibly have been a factor, but I'm convinced without Fang, he would constantly be feeling all the emotions he kept buried within him. So Fang is kind of like almost an emotional support animal, to an extent. It's kind of referenced there, but I don't outright write it in there. So yeah. And then it says maybe Fang's connection bells, so also something to balance Kate's wolf side out. Bryce asked, I understand, but at least they're both safe, right? She nodded and asked, he said you three, that's what mattered. But anyways, what are your names so we're not strangers? Bryce said, I'm Bryce, this is Jess, and that is Nate. She smiled and said, it is very nice to meet Cade's protectors. I, Madame Zelda, fortune teller and healer of Black Spore. So she actually has her own TCG image where she's got these cards. So this part of the story, like, I didn't really know where to go from here, and I kind of looked at the cards, because she's a fortune teller, right? So I was like, why don't we just include some tarot cards in here? Like, I even did some research on tarot cards, because I do play, like, games that include tarot cards, so I thought it would be cool to, like, include some of that writing into the lore here. But Bryce looked at her confused and asked, healer or Black Spore, does that mean you keep this place going, spooky place going? She laughed and said, no, I heal the ones who are hurting or going through a traumatic time, like most of the local ghosts here. They feel all sorts of emotions, sometimes anger, sadness, or fear. I help them move on so they no longer have to suffer. Jess teared up and said, that's so beautiful. Jess tears up a lot. If that's not obvious, Jess is emotional. But yeah, so. And then Bryce had to agree. It's almost like she has his job, but a little more complex and deeper. So yeah, Bryce and her almost have the same sort of job, but her job is a lot deeper. Bryce asked her, so, fortune telling then, mind reading our fortunes? Cade smiled from the hut, knowing that he had made some new friends. She looked at them stern and said, are you sure you want to know what fate has in store for you three? So this part's important because it's crucial to the story. It's crucial to, like, all four of the Realm Keepers. So if you weren't, like, super paying attention to this part when you read the entire story, you should have been, because it's kind of crucial. So let me go over it. So Bryce thought about it and felt like it might be good to know. So he said, yeah, I think we're up for it. She said, good, let's have her read. She had many things at her table, crystal ball, items that gave off good luck, and a book for fortune telling, I assumed. But she brushed all the things off to the side and brought out 12 cards. She said, I'm going to shuffle the deck. These are Sanctuary tarot cards. I got these from the queen herself. So referring to Queen Valerian, she gave her the cards. And then Bryce didn't really think she was just a fortune teller and healer for the Murky Swamp, but she continued. I'm going to place 3 cards on the table for each of you to flip over, and I will tell you what they represent. Bryce looked over at Cade and asked, "You're not going to participate?" He shook his head and said, "I already know my fate. Only time will tell now." So Cade already knows his fate. He already knows what's going to happen to him. So if that's, like, any indication of, like, how important this is, you know, there you go. But yeah, Zelda shuffled the deck and placed a card for each of us on the table. She asked Jess to flip the card face up. And then Zelda says, "This card is called Tower. It is upright, which means your pride will be broken and there will be a great disaster to follow." So this is going off of, like, the tarot card wiki, basically. The best one I could find. And yeah, Jess asked, "Could this fate be changed?" She shook her head and said, "Your fate's been set in stone long before you came here for the reading." So regardless of if they read these cards, this would have happened. Basically, I couldn't have... I didn't really have to include this part in the writing, but I thought, how was I going to include Madame Zelda into the story? And this was how. So yeah. So Jess got the tower. It is upright. It means your pride will be broken. There will be a great disaster to follow. So, yeah, this kind of teases to, like, what would happen to her, the story. So, yeah. And then Jess sighed but nodded. Next, she had Nate flip his card. Zelda said, "This one is called Death, and it is upright, which could mean a lot of things for you, but there will be an end, no beginning." So it's not clear, like, what's going to happen. It's not. I mean, it could be clear, but it could mean a lot of things. There will be an end, but no beginning. Nath gulped and said, "Well, I can't live forever, I guess," which that were possible, but I'll live with that card. And then she asked Bryce to flip his, and he did, and his card was the most extreme one, to say the least. She looked and paused, then looked up at him and said, "This is the Hanged Man. It's upright, which means at some point, you will sacrifice yourself for the greater good." Bryce froze for a second. And then he says, "All I've done is train picks how to use their mounts. Not once did I believe it would lead me to sacrifice my life." Bryce asked her, "What did Cade get for his fortune?" And so, again, we go into what he got. And she said, flipped upright, the Wheel of Fortune, which means his fate is inevitable, meaning he's going to be ready for it. So it's pretty cut and dry. His fate's inevitable, which means it can't really be changed. But yeah, I got all of that from, like, a wiki on what the cards actually mean, which it was kind of cool to learn, as well as, like, writing all this. And then for a guy with no emotion most of the time, that's got to be tough to live with. Bryce got it from the table and approached Cade and asked, "How would you like to join us?" He looked shocked and said, "Join you? Why should I?" Bryce said, Zelda said your fate is inevitable. You might as well go out protecting something worth it all." Bryce handed him the Chaos Shard, and he says, hand him the Chaos Shard. There we go. I'm doing a lot of, like, fixing typos, but this is a good process. And then he says, "This is what I was tasked to do, to hide these shards and protect them. I protect the Order Shard, Jess protects the Nature Shard, and Nath protects the Machine Shard. It's our duty to see this through." He thought about it and stared into the shard, then said, "I can feel the emotion running through the shard. Nothing but rage and destruction. I don't like the idea of someone getting their hands on something like this. I'll protect it with what life I have left." That is such a... I wrote it, but it's such a depressing line, dude. It's so sad. And then he handed the shard to Zelda and said, "Keep this safe. I have to go with them, but I'll be back." She looked at him with a worried look but smiled and said, "I'll see you when you get back." So they started heading for Shadowglade, but then Zelda waved me over before Bryce left. She asked, "Bryce, do you know what this shard is?" He shook his head and said, "All I know is that it cannot get into the wrong hands. I don't know what all the shards together would do, and I don't want to know." She smiled and said, "You're a good leader, Bryce. Your team and Cade seem to respect you, but be careful. I fear dark times are coming, and we won't know what'll hit us when it does." Bryce nodded and said, "Whatever happens, we'll be here to defend Sacred Grove." She sighed and said, "For all our sakes, I hope so. Now go, be safe." Zelda felt like she had seen the shard before. So I'll go into that, obviously, later in the chapters. But yeah, so basically, Cade gives the shard to Zelda for safekeeping. I guess hiding in black spores like the best location. So yeah, there's a little nod that she might have seen the shard before. So yeah, and then Bryce returned with the team and asked Cade, "So we all have code names, but it looks like you don't have one yet. Does Wolf Boy sound good?" He choked and said, "Actually, I think Wildclaw suits me just fine." He agreed, and so did Jess and Nath. We headed for Straggler to report back to tell you with the shards hidden. My team formed. We'll stop whatever comes at us. So yeah, there's not really a huge like explanation by why certain names are formed. I think Mage Tech is kind of obvious because he found it fitting. Crackshot Bryce names her that. Ghost Shadow came from a teacher. Wildclaw, he just came up with it. So yeah, it's not really specified. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into Chapter 9.